He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we got a real gem of an episode, a bunch of Dogman encounters that we're going to be talking about. However, before we get into that, a couple of plugs. This past month, we interviewed Ryan Willis from Sasquatch University. It was an absolute delight having him guest on the show. Definitely go check that out. We also have a new story time from Reuben, which is some heckin' good fun and laughs. And coming next week, a very, very detailed episode on the UAP situation that unfolded the other week on July 26th. This is going to be divided into two parts. And it'll be both myself and Reuben that are going to be deep diving into this. First part's going to be basically focusing on the opening statements of the key witnesses. And then part two, we're going to dive into the follow-up questions that were asked to the witnesses and all the relevant information affiliated with it. I cannot wait to talk about it because there is some very possible history in the making that unfolded with that conference. Just incredible, absolutely incredible. But without further ado, let's get into this Dogman stuff. Now, this individual has claimed to be a witness to these cryptids more than once, in fact, quite a few times, having a first experience back when they were 17 years old, which we're going to talk about today. That initial experience had, at least the way I see it, opened the door to more of these things coming, including this person's own curiosity, resulting in more expeditions and explorations and treks that were basically an attempt to learn more about this particular cryptid. And following that is a report of their most recent Dogman encounter. So I have two that I will be talking about tonight, and I quote their first encounter. My encounter. This happened a couple years ago at the time I was 17. Me and three of my friends had been up to a cabin in North Carolina in the mountains. We were celebrating the end of junior year of high school, and it was just us four for the first night that we got there, when we heard some noises from outside the cabin at about 1:30 in the morning. I did not want to look outside to see what it was, but my friend did say that they couldn't see anything, so I looked out, couldn't see anything. Next morning, we went outside and saw some footprints. Now, outside, the footprints looked like I've never seen before, and I hope to never see again. Fast forwarding to the night, we decided just to go outside and have a campfire. Of course, we're 17, 18-year-old kids joking around, laughing, having fun, and enjoying the summer, when we hear a growl from the woods. And the shrubbery and smaller plants around us start moving like they're in the wind, even though there's no wind. I look behind me, and I see two amber eyes staring. I turn to my friend to ask if he's seen it too. He looks at me, pale in the face, and asks me, "What the hell is that thing?" I don't know what it is. All I know is it's massive, and I don't want to find out. So we run inside the cabin and tell the other people that were there what we saw. They don't believe us, so they look outside, and it's standing there, about 9.5 feet tall, grayish black hair, very muscular, with these massive claws and huge fangs. So they ran inside, shut the door, and we closed the blinds and tried to forget about everything. Later that night, I went up to bed, I looked outside my window, and it was out there staring directly at me. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that night. The next day, we packed up and left. Not wanting to spend a night in those woods. This is the first time I've told anybody about this, because I didn't think anybody would believe what I saw. To this day, the image of that creature staring into my eyes from my bedroom window still haunts me. End quote. This is a really interesting report, and albeit, yes, they are young, but it's not the first scenario where young individuals have encountered these things, at least in reports that I found. The thing that I do find interesting is that this thing was not instigating any sort of confrontation necessarily. Maybe it was in a way that it understands, but to us, no, we're just getting the heck out of there and we want to stay away from it. But this thing was basically just standing there, making itself known, but it wasn't bashing into the windows, bashing down the door. I guarantee this thing, if it wanted to go inside the home, it could have gone inside the home, but it chose not to. It was there to make itself known. And you have to wonder what sort of super heightened sensory capabilities these things have. And I said it because when the gentleman gets to his bedroom window, looks out the window, and this thing is staring at him and making eye contact, knowing which window he was going to be at, it's almost similar in the sense where other reports, people are driving, they go around a corner, they got their high beams on, and their high beams will glaze over something sitting there, notably a dogman, and the dogman is already making eye contact with the driver. The drivers get very anxious knowing that this thing is looking through the headlights and are looking at them, making eye contact. Now, I know if a car is coming towards me and it's nighttime, those headlights are blinding me. I can't see where that driver is, let alone see and make direct eye contact. So this is a common thing that seems to be reoccurring in these encounters. This is just something I wanted to talk about and note there. It's very fascinating. Now, follow-up question to this is as follows, and I quote, "Did it harass you guys all night? Like, did you hear it scratching at windows or doors? Did it climb on the roof? Sometimes they can stay all night terrorizing you." And in response, occasionally, yes, we did hear some tapping on the windows. I think I heard something on the roof, but I really hope I didn't because I don't know how it would have gotten up there. The cabin was 3 stories with no balconies and no real way to climb up. End quote. Now, these things love getting onto roofs. Through much discussion with Reuben, we find some sort of asphyxiation between them and people in cars. But in the event of a small-scale home or cabin, they tend to get close to windows and somehow end up on the roofs running around making noises. That is something that I have also heard reoccurring in other accounts before. Moving on to their most recent encounter, and I quote, "I had another encounter. I apologize for the lack of punctuation. I'm just trying to get it out and using voice text. I've had several encounters before, a lot of which I posted on this Reddit, but 2 days ago, I had another encounter. It's the first encounter I've had in over 3 months. I think of an encounter as when I come face to face with one of these things, outside, and not just seeing it in my car. Last weekend, I decided I would do a hiking trip where I was just going to hike a local trail, set up camp, and spend the night out there. The hike was beautiful. I completed my hike uneventfully. I set up camp at about 6 p.m. and got a fire started so I could cook dinner. Dinner went uneventful, and so did most of the rest of the evening after dinner. I went back to my tent and I just relaxed, read a book, and enjoyed nature. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I know, I hear something outside. I instinctively know what it is because I have been taking a lot of time to actually research these creatures and figure out how to best live among them if you ever encounter one. I stayed silent and didn't move from my tent until I thought the thing was gone. It wasn't gone. I climbed out of my tent to investigate and to pack up and go because I knew I wasn't sleeping that night. I didn't hear anything in the woods. It was still dead silent, so I knew it was still probably around, but I knew one thing. I needed to get out of there because even though I know a lot about these creatures, I still know that they are dangerous. Even though I knew it was dangerous to hike in the dark, I had a pretty powerful headlamp, plenty of batteries because I like to prepare for anything, and I knew it wasn't a very long hike back to the car. About 2 hours at most as I began my hike back to the car, I began to hear it following me, crashing through the brush, just out of sight. So I picked up the pace and unhooked my gun from my bag in case I needed to fight. It continued to follow me for about 10 minutes before it finally showed itself. This one was pretty average size for a dogman, about 8.5 feet tall. I don't know if it was black or dark gray, hard to tell at night. This one had orange eyes, and we looked at each other for a few seconds, and then it went off back into the woods. The entire time I was hiking back to my car, I kept hearing it following me. Off and on, I'd hear it crash to the brush. I never did see it again. and I made my way back to my car safely. This is one of my most unique encounters that I've ever had because it seemed like this one was not as aggressive as the others I've seen. It was just kind of making its presence known. I believe I don't know if it had any ill intent at all. All I know is it still scared the shit out of me. That is my most recent encounter. End quote. In a follow-up inquiry to this, the individual confirms that they are at least 4 years older since their first sighting, and they've had up to 15 encounters with these things. And again, I described it as encounters that he classifies as encounters prior, but many of these are by complete accident. But prominently, he listed the sightings for these in Tennessee, West Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. I find it interesting about the eyes as well, because in both scenarios, amber, orangish colored eyes, that is a huge improvement. You don't want to see one of these cryptids with red eyes, especially with Sasquatch. I feel like the two share a more sinister notion when you see these things with red eyes. And is that a factual foundation of like science or evidence to back such a statement? No, there's nothing concrete to back that up. That is just my own observation through reading and listening to so many different mediums on these subjects. So orange amber eyes, definitely an improvement. So moving on from there, I met a gentleman that had an experience in North England, and this is interesting because England has a lot of history, hellhounds and other dogmen, werewolves, all those kinds of things that make it into the movies and the books. And so I always get really excited to meet someone that has an encounter across the pond, because I myself am in Canada. Sasquatch is very rare over there. Dogman it's not easy for me to always find someone over there that has an experience, let alone someone that wants to share it. So, and I quote, my account goes as follows. It was a pleasant night in North England. Around 12:30 a.m. in August 2011, I was walking to my then girlfriend's. Being about 17, I was by now well accustomed to the streets that only a few years ago seemed quite alien. Like any other night in those days, I was out with friends. We would get high and find something fun to do. I was a little bit stoned. Writing this, I still am all these years later. But I have been smoking for at least 2 years by that point, and you don't just hallucinate on weed. You can get paranoid, sure, but you do not visually see things like this. All these years later, I still don't see this as a hallucination. Rather, the weed may have allowed this to happen somehow, but I don't want to get into that side too much and just focus on the actual event as I'm writing. When it was time to go home, we would split off into groups and head in our own directions. I was now walking to my girlfriend's alone after leaving my friend at the end of his road. To picture, imagine an empty but quiet main road heading out of town into the villages. There are fields, trees, and also horses. But this wasn't a horse or the shape of any animal that I knew. I'm walking on the left-hand side of the road. It's dark, and the only light is from the lampposts that are dotted every 10 or so paces near the hedgerow on the right side. That realization hit me instantly when I saw this creature, the shape of it in the glow of the light. This long, huge, black, muscly, tall, and lanky, but at the same time ripped thing. It was massive, 7 or 8 feet. Its tail was over a meter. It looked nothing like I'd ever seen before or since. Arched over almost, the form of this thing. It looked like it could stand up bipedally if it wanted to. All of this I kind of processed in the blink of an eye. Actually, I did, because I stood there staring at this beast. My eyes just locked in a way that was instinctual to see if it was aware of me or something. And as I'm staring, my hand is reaching simultaneously into my pocket and grabbing my phone. I don't even look at my phone as it's in my hand. I just dial the first number on my call list. You know how when you press the green button on the phone and see the list? I pressed the last number I called. This is all in the first few seconds when I realized what I think I'm seeing. This is all where the story weirdly gets a bit blurry. I called my friend and explained to him that I was seeing a goddamned werewolf. I remember doing that, but I don't remember hanging up, or really more importantly, walking past it or seeing it go off. My friend remembers me calling, but he doesn't remember what we said at the end of the call. This was almost 10 years ago now, and it quickly became a joke, but I think he and the people who I talked to about it somewhat believe me now. There is a history of similar sightings in the UK, both old and new, and it wasn't until a few years later that I became aware of a paranormal researcher in my area that they are releasing a documentary this year about the werewolf dogman phenomenon. I'm not affiliated with them or anyone, but it sure does drive my story home when I find this out years later. Since then, I've been following the subjects and subjects alike, but if you have any questions, because my memory is bad after some time, and I've told the story so many times to myself that it has become strained, but I want to get this down, so thanks for reading. End quote. Now, I correspond a little bit more, and they were just telling me about how after so long, telling yourself the same story, it's bound to get messed up somewhere along the line. But the things that they remember the most accurately are the sizing. The size of this thing, its physical, muscular, lean, fit appearance, no fat, black. They mentioned that they didn't see its eyes or head, but they will be returning to that area next to the lamppost, basically to take a picture of them and just size it up to scale. In closing, they did mention that the tail was also very visible, now that I think about it, and that other dogman sightings necessarily don't have tails that are visible. I don't know if that is... I don't know how accurate that is. I can't speak to it. My interpretation of this, however, would be when you see this thing, you aren't looking at that tail. You're closing on its eyes. People usually talk about the smile that these things make when it's not necessarily smiling, but when you look at a dog and it opens its mouth and it's like panting and it's got its teeth showing and it looks like a smile almost. And I think that's usually what pulls people. When someone is staring at you, you can feel when you're being watched. And when you go to look over at someone, you're always looking at the eyes. That's your first level of contact, usually, when you're looking at someone. And I believe the same thing is with animals. You make that eye contact. And so everything else kind of fades away. And how do you, in a situation, know to just look up and down at this thing that shouldn't exist and take in every single detail about it? I think this gentleman got a fantastic description of this thing, with the best they could in this circumstance. And pulling out your phone and getting into this conversation, I don't blame him for not remembering most of it, because you're still witnessing something. I'm very curious, though, and the gentleman was just not able to recall what really happened after that fact. Did the thing leave? Did he just continue walking past it? What really happened there? But it just sounds like whatever this was, it appeared, and it moseyed on away. It goes very much hand in hand with the encounters that we mentioned before. These things will make themselves known and present and visually manifesting in front of you, but it's not like they're trying to kill you. When you look at Sasquatch, it's up for debate. There is a preconceived notion that maybe Sasquatch chooses not to hurt an individual because they know other people will come looking. People still go missing in the woods all the time. Whether or not that's just a simple mistake or it is something more sinister involved with a Sasquatch, that remains to be seen, of course. But is that something that could be applied to a dogman? Can a dogman make that understanding thought that, hey, if I hurt someone, if I remove someone, more of these someones are going to come around looking? It makes me just kind of get curious, because we did talk about government, and while I certainly believe that the Canadian and American governments have their own trajectories on these things, it would be very interesting to get into a deep dive discussion on what the British government would be handling in regards to these things, and just what information you think that they could be getting into. And I say that because when you look at North America, you have the black SUVs and you got the men in black storming an area, just kind of keeping things chill. Not really, but just in certain situations that have been reported. I wonder what it's like for a parallel equivalent overseas over there. Again, it's just a totally different world. And it's just a world that I want to learn a little bit more. And it's just always such a fantastic occurrence when we get to talk to someone like my friend Carl, I should say, when he came onto the show and shared all this information about banshees. And it was very, very informative. And it's just really eye-opening. So that is something that I hope to get more in depth with on the show. I'm rambling now, so I'm just gonna wrap this up. Those are the 3 encounters that we have for this week's episode. I am so excited to get into next week's episodes. I highly recommend that if you have a chance to listen to the conference beforehand, you can. Otherwise, if you haven't, you can just tune into the episode. Me and Reuben are going to condense all the important factors of the conference and just talk about everything. I keep saying conference, but it's a hearing. I apologize. But you're going to get all that information from us, so stay tuned. And until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.